Hello, part number 1534, lamp holder from the 1930s Electron set. Hi folks and welcome back. This week we have the Saloon car and a little bit of a quandary on what it was they based the model on. After all, it has a look of any number of cars that I know, but I can't find any one model to say, it's this. It has the right look of a British Standard Motor Company Model 8 of 1953, which is sort of about the right time for this manual. But that's the thing about the human brain. It is always scanning for data. But it is slightly more than that. The brain not only scans for information and then filters it, sorting the important from the trivial, but it also actively interprets what it is we see. That's one of the reasons why you see faces and things, and once seen, you cannot unsee it. So, why does the brain do this? It is part of some of our oldest brain functions, ones that date back to a time when threat identification was a very real thing in a world where threats existed on a multi-level basis. After all, in most developed countries, the idea of a pack of wolves entering a village in the dead of night in search of food doesn't happen anymore. But not that long ago it did. In fact, only a few hundred years ago, and in some European countries less than that. Have you ever got spooked? Nothing's wrong, but your brain tells you that something isn't right. The hackles on the back of your neck go up. Your breathing increases all of a sudden. You feel cold, and for no reason, you break out in a sweat. Don't worry, it's perfectly normal. Your brain is over-processing information and needs to relax. You feel cold because your blood has been pulled back to your major organs, and you sweat to control temperature, and to release chemicals in your body to deal with the impending disaster. In fact, you can smell fear. Well, predators can. Or more to the point, you can smell the bacteria reacting to the chemicals given off in your sweat, induced from fear-based behaviour. That's one of the reasons why if you're nervous around animals, they will attack. Of course, most of the time nothing's wrong. The car that was following you turns off. The strange noise in the house is nothing more than normal contraction noises caused by cooling. The strange shape of the looming person walking towards you on the foggy night turns out to be quiet Mrs. Miggins from number 36. She's so nice to everybody. Nobody would realise she's really a mass murderer. Oops! So there you go. My brain is trying to decide what this car is, because it has to be a car that I need to recognise, because of reasons. And sometimes we just need to move on and get over it. What this car does process is an insight of what it meant to have a car. Because car ownership in the UK is not that old. In fact, it was only a little over 60 years ago that nearly 60% of UK households didn't own a car. The car has been the catalyst that has socially changed Britain. Without it, women would have fewer rights. Our workforce would be less able to be mobile and forced to live where the work was, leading to factories being built into the fabric of the city, as they were pre-World War II, in turn leading to greater pollution and multiple levels of depredation and poverty. And we're on the verge of a new revolution in personal transport, caused not only by climate and environmental issues, but also by new technologies becoming available. But to date, on the British road network, there are nearly 41 million internal combustion engine vehicles and over 1 million EVs, all of which are licensed. With a further 720,000 unlicensed vehicles on our road network daily, costing us, the taxpayer, over £100 million in lost revenue to the country. And that's before we get into not being insured, roadworthy, etc. Okay, I will be honest, Having spent nearly 2 decades in the NHS dealing with the aftermath of road accidents and the long-term impact that this has on people's lives, I get a bit heated over things like untaxed, uninsured vehicles. Private vehicles have paved the way for mass transportation in Britain for over 6 decades now and constitute £74 billion worth of trade yearly, with an export revenue of nearly £30 billion, nearly reaching the amount we imported. And our biggest export market is the EU, with 50% of our car exports being sold to our nearest neighbours, with nearly all UK exported vans and lorries ending up on the roads in Europe. The expansion of private vehicle ownership post-World War II also led to the changes in British law. In 1956, Ernest Marples, the then Minister of Transport, introduced the yearly Ministry of Transport test, a long since defunct government department now covered by the Department of Transport. It's the same thing, tastes the same, looks the same, just a new and improved wrapper to better cover the problems. The MOT, as a test is now known as, covers over 20 separate points. When it was first introduced, the first MOT was when the vehicle was 10 years old. By 1961 it was reduced to 7 years, and by 1967 it was reduced to 3 years. This was down to the excessive volume of failures. In fact, over 30% of cars on the road now will fail their tests on the first test, requiring work to make them road safe. Just think about the 10 cars around you. 3 of them, maybe including yours, are not road legal due to some defect. When first introduced, the test cost 75 pence. It now costs £54. I'm not sure we get value for money for that. But that's the government for you. They giveth with one hand while robbing you blind with the other, crushing you over the head, giving you a good kicking, then checking your pockets just in case they've missed anything. The UK has over 32,000 MOT test centres to choose from, with some 67,000 trained personnel to test your vehicle. Out of interest, in the 2020 to 2021 figures, the latest information available from the Department of Transport when writing this script, some 173 examiners had their certificate or ticket, as it's known, to test vehicles withdrawn. Some 1,400 were warned about their practices. 7 were refused a ticket in the first place, and 350 were disqualified from ever being testers again. Without the MOT, the number of dangerous vehicles on our roads would multiply year on year. Currently, it's around 3%. And the worst offending areas for not having an MOT. Northern Ireland comes in first place, followed by Scotland in second, and then the northeast of England in third, with not being able to afford the test being cited as the main reason for not having one. I said earlier that cars had brought better rights for women. What it allowed was the option to travel with greater ease to access not only jobs but education as well. But this was not just for women, as it also allowed men a greater chance of improving their lot in life. In the 1970s, we start to see people being able to buy houses in the countryside and work in the cities. Where in the past this had always fallen onto public transport to supply transportation, at last people could commute to work themselves with the greater freedom that private transport brought you. But the hold of the private motor car on the British public has not been for long. In fact, America can really hold that flag the highest. US Congress noted that the ownership of a car was seen as a vital step for society as a whole. And not only a car marked you as being different, almost an underachiever, a failed person. After all, what you drive says so much about you as a person. Expensive car means that you're rich and stable in life, well-rounded and generally a good person. Want to be trusted with difficult things to solve, a leader. An old battered car means that you're poor, that you cannot achieve and therefore cannot manage your money well. and are undeserving of life's finery and better things, poorly educated and poorly paid. In other words, a failure. But what's to become of the car and private ownership? The idea of the freedom that it brings you is huge. But as we enter a period of climactic and environmental change, our ownership of the freedom might well be changed with it. After all, growing up in Walsall in the Midlands in the 1960s, my older brother remembers clearly there only being 3 cars in the street, and one of those belonged to the local GP who lived opposite. The street was quiet and peaceful. The milkman still delivered milk every day, and the postman called twice a day. When they moved in 1969 to come up to Consett, nearly every house had a car. And when in 1981 the Consett Steelworks closed and people got their redundancies, they did one of 2 things. Either they bought their council houses, or they bought a new car. There is talk now of people not owning their cars in the future, just calling any number of self-driving vehicles to get you from A to B. And while I can see the idea, I think that the people who are putting the idea forward have failed to grasp the importance of what the US Congress saw so clearly in their investigation. And that's the importance of owning your own vehicle and the freedom it brings. The best example I can see of this was Jerry Springer's father's comment. Parked in the drive of the house, the car sat ready, tank full, always. And when asked why the car was always ready to go, his response was, "I won't make the mistake a second time. This time, when they get in power, I will leave before it's too late." They had emigrated to the US in 1949, having escaped from Nazi Germany during the Second World War. Not all his family was so lucky.